5, 4, 3, 2.
Yugi Bros! What up guys, it's Yugi Bros with a deck profile. We actually got first place this week at our Speed Duel local event. It was 8 players, one shy of 4 rounds. I was so sad about that. But we keep getting new players, which is nice, so maybe if they all show up in the same day, we'll actually be able to have like a decent turnout. So it was only 3 rounds, and my matchups were the Mirror match and then 2 XYZ decks. But we played Relinquished. We've been playing Relinquished on the channel lately. Obviously, you guys have seen the videos. And so we played basically the same deck, but I figured this video I'd give you more of an in-depth as to how, why we play what we play and why we play it, instead of just showcasing the duels and then showcasing the deck at the end but not saying anything about it. So we played Relinquished with Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, and the reason we did that is because I feel Relinquished doesn't have a dedicated skill in this game. You could say it has multiple dedicated skills, but I feel all of the skills for Relinquished kind of do one thing but not everything. For example, Ritual Ceremony, if I remember correctly, is a one-sided Dragon Caller, and so if you have the Ritual Monster in hand, you can add the spell, but you can't reveal the spell to add the Ritual Monster, or it's the other way around, but either way, it's very one-sided, and it's only once per duel, so once it goes off once, it's not really effective. The card I was playing for a while, Switcheroo, lets you shuffle a card from your hand back into the deck and draw one card twice per duel. Kind of fixes your hand if you open kind of bricky, because you always need this and you need the ritual spell, so you know you have to have both in tandem with each other. But the problem there is if you're using your skill to make your deck more consistent, sometimes that's just not enough. And then in a format where like the other skills are taking such advantage of their opponent's boards and stuff, well, your skill is just trying to make your deck more consistent. That's not really, I feel like, a good use of a skill. And then there's a Thousand Eyes Spell, which people would tell you is the most dedicated of the Relinquished skills. But in my opinion, that card kind of defeats the purpose of Relinquished. So you don't have to play the ritual spells with it. You can actually, once per turn, either Fusion Summon a Thousand Eyes Restrict or Ritual Summon a Relinquished the way you normally would by discarding a card. However, the downside is you don't get a battle phase that turn, and I feel that's really, really tough for Relinquished, because the point of this is you want to summon this, take an opponent's monster, and capitalize off taking the monster. You don't want to then pass to your opponent and have them get rid of it. Kind of defeats the whole point of you taking their card and trying to, you know, do something with it. So if it gave you a battle phase but like it didn't do damage, I think maybe that would be a little bit better. I'm not sure. So the reason we played Cocoon of Ultra Evolution is because I feel like this deck doesn't have enough offense by itself. Like, there's not enough things to give it offense, and saying you could play Sonic Bird and Senju as the offense is, in my opinion, terrible, because pre-prep is a better card to search both of them than searching one or the other. We're not in a slow enough format anymore where searching one or the other usually is relevant unless you're playing it in tandem with another ritual archetype. So it doesn't really fix the problem. And your normal summon is pretty free in this deck as well, but I feel like there's no like single monster outside of Breaker the Magical Warrior that like really makes you want to just utilize the normal summon to your fullest. There are some crazy things I've seen out there, and I'll definitely try to showcase those in future videos. So I ended up playing Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, which is a skill that has 2 effects. Once per duel, you can shuffle an insect from your grave back in your deck and draw a card, and the other is you can send an insect equipped with an equip card to the graveyard to special summon an insect from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. So usually people do this with Parasite Paranoid and Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth. And that is exactly what we were doing with this. It gives the deck a little bit of a different edge that's a little different than just the conventional, alright, I summon Relinquish, I absorb your monster type thing. And it also gives this deck another beat stick that, you know, normally it wouldn't have in Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth. So I'm going to go through the deck list real quick, and I'm going to explain my card choices and stuff, give you a little bit more. And also for the people that don't really know what Relinquish does, I'll explain that as well. So first off, we played Triple Relinquished. Obviously, this is the centerpiece of the deck. This card says you can ritual summon it with Black Illusion Ritual, which is the spell card, the ritual spell used for this. And then once per turn, you can target one monster your opponent controls, equip that target to this card. This card's attack and defense become the equipped monster's attack and defense, which is really cool. So this card plays off the strength of what your opponent is playing. So if your opponent's playing a weaker deck, your Relinquished is going to be weaker. But if your opponent's playing a really strong deck, you get a strong monster. The upside, though, is that it spot removals things off the field. As everyone knows, Inner Conflict is a really, really good skill, where you pay half your life points to take an opponent's monster and then do whatever you want with it. Usually people just tribute it off. that's a really good thing in two respects, because one, you got rid of something on your opponent's field, you made them -1, and at the same time you get something else that's usually pretty bigger that you usually tribute their monster with. So it's a lot of advantage type thing, and this deck is all about advantage, taking the opponent's monsters. You can only equip one monster to it max, but there's a lot of ways to get rid of the thing equipped to it to then next turn use its effect again. It is once per turn, but it is a soft once per turn, so each Relinquished can do its effect once per turn, which is cool. In addition to gaining its attack and defense, if this card battles an opponent's monster, any battle damage you would take from that battle is also directed to your opponent as effect damage, which can come up in niche situations, which is really nice. Also, if this card would be destroyed by battle, the equipped monster is destroyed instead, but keep in mind, if it's destroyed any other way or leaves the field, this card does not go in place of it, kind of like how XYZ, the equip thing, says if it dies by battle or card effect, the equip goes instead. This is only by battle, so that's something to keep in mind. So in context with that, we obviously played triple Black Illusion Ritual, which is the ritual spell. I'm kind of going out of order here just to explain everything. And then we played triple Pre-Preparation of Rites. Now, I don't know why this card is allowed in Speed Duels. I think this is insane. This card lets you add a ritual spell from your deck to your hand, and one ritual monster listed on that ritual spell from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So even if you still have one of these in deck, and let's say one Relinquished is in the graveyard, you are allowed to pre-preparation the ritual spell from deck to hand and add the Relinquished from grave to hand if for some reason you either want to keep a Relinquished in the deck, or you're just in that situation where like you had to tribute a Relinquished for a Relinquished early. This still isn't dead, which is kind of nuts. Pre-prep is a hard once per turn, so you can only activate one per turn, but you play 3 of it because, you know, you might as well max out on it as possible. I've also noticed in Relinquish in general, you can actually go above the 20 card mark. Not that people don't do that with everything in Speed Duels already, but you can go above the 20 card mark because if you play exactly 20 with 3 of these, you tend to draw one of these 2 cards without hitting all 3 of these, and then late game one of these ends up being dead. Now, I'm not saying you're trying to resolve all 3 in one game, but more often than not, sometimes this card will be more dead if you play less cards in the deck, so if you spread it out a little bit more, this card is a little bit more live all the time. So that's our 9-card package for Relinquished. In addition, we play triple Illusionist Faceless Magician. Now this card is what makes the deck consistent. This card has multiple effects, one of which is if an Eyes Restrict fusion monster or Relinquish you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand or graveyard, which is nuts. Nuts that it can be used in either spot. So you drawing it as a dead draw, it's not really dead because it can summon out once this thing dies by battle or card effect. Keep in mind it has to be face up though. There are ways to dodge around this. If you flip this card face down and destroy it by like a card effect or something, this won't trigger. But if it is face down and it gets attacked and damage step, it does flip up, therefore this can still summon. The other effect this card has is if it leaves the field, period. Leaves the field, doesn't matter how. You can special summon an Eyes Restrict Fusion or a Relinquished from your graveyard. And that part is nuts about it. So, against something like Inner Conflict, if they tribute this off, like if they take this and tribute it, you're not getting this, which is unfortunate. But if they take this and tribute this, you get the effect to bring back Relinquished. So a lot of the times against decks like that, where you have to like dodge around things that tribute or remove things without destroying by battle or card effect, you want to always leave this on board so you can bring back a Relinquish from the graveyard. But this deck has a lot of continuous staying power because you can loop these. Each effect of this is once per turn, so there are ways to dodge this, similar to like XYZ has a really good way if you have multiple cards in hand with XYZ Dragon Cannon, where you pop this, then this summons, and you pop this, then this summons this back. And then if you find a third way to kill this, then you're not getting the loop anymore. But you do have to go through multiple resources to do it a lot of the time, and that is a huge, huge upside to this deck's staying power, is that a lot of decks can't handle dealing with it like that multiple times in the same turn. Therefore, they're kind of just forced to pass a lot of times on you sitting on this. And sitting on this is not a bad thing. It has to leave the field. You can open multiple of these. One of these is on the field. You can tribute it for another one and then have this effect bring back Relinquish. We also actually play one copy of Wonder Wand in this deck, which works out really well in tandem because you can, for example, if this is on board, you can equip the Wonder Wand to it, send it to the graveyard to draw 2 cards, and then this effect triggers to summon a Relinquish back from the graveyard. The Wonder Wand is in here simply because the deck is over 20 cards, and we want to try to keep it consistent. I'm not a fan of Allure of Darkness. You guys have seen my video on I think Allure sucks in Speed Duels currently. Don't get me wrong, I think the card will be better over time, but right now I just think it doesn't utilize enough. I actually think Wonder Wand is better, and even though you do need a Spellcaster to make it work, everything in this deck outside of Sphere Karibo in the main deck, and the Moth package obviously is a spellcaster. Anything that's going to sit on the board that's not Moth is a spellcaster. So Wonder Wand is always good live game 1, but it's also a really easy side out game 2 and 3. And I'll explain the side deck thing in a second, because this deck's real tight on that. So in addition to all of these, the last monster we played that's not the Moth package is Triple Sphere Karibo. Now, Sphere Karibo in general is just the best quote-unquote hand trap in the game currently, where if you attack, if your opponent declares an attack, you can discard this to negate the attack and switch their monster to defensive position. That's really good by itself, but this has an additional effect where if you are to ritual summon, you can actually banish this card from your graveyard as one of the tributes required for the ritual summon. But thank God Relinquished is a level 1, so you can banish this as the entire tribute, and you don't have to lose any extra field presence to summoning Relinquish out to the field. So Sphere Karibo actually gives you 2 effects in this deck instead of 1, which makes it really, really strong. So then we play the Moth package, and I know in the YouTube videos I was playing, it was 1 and 2, and then it was, I think, 2 and 3 or 3 and 3. We elected this tournament to go 2 and 3, and mostly when you're playing Moth, you don't mind bricking with a Moth because Parasite Paranoid's second effect ends up making the brick not so much of a brick. But I'll explain that in a second. The point of this card is, this thing is a quick effect that targets a face-up monster on the field, and then you can equip it from your hands to that target. Quick effect meaning you can do it on either player's turn, which is really cool. The equipped monster becomes an insect monster, cannot attack other insect monsters. Also, its effects that activate the target an insect monster are negated. Now, both of those other last 2 effects there don't really matter. The point is, you put it on a monster, you turn it into an insect, and that insect is equipped with this, being an equipped card. Now you can trigger your Cocoon's effect to send both their monster and this to the graveyard, to special summon Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth from your deck. However, Parasite has another effect that comes up in niche situations, which says if this equipped card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon an insect that's level 7 or higher from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions. So if you're stuck on dead one of these, and you activate this effect, and it's on that, and you send the monster to the graveyard, for this effect, you actually get this thing's second effect to summon another Moth from your hand, which is ridiculous that you can even do that. Another way that effect becomes relevant is you, at any point in time, let's say you've already expunged this thing's effect, and you have one of these in your hand and a dead Moth, right? If your opponent attacks one of your monsters, or if you attack one of their monsters, you can equip this to the weaker monster that's going to die in that battle. It'll go to the grave, and then its effect will activate to summon a Moth for free. So you can get extra firepower off literally just this dumb combo of having a Moth dead in your hand. As long as you have a Paranoid. We max out on the Paranoids, obviously, because its effect is really, really strong and we want to see it as soon as possible. But, like I said, it's not even dead late game. You can just use this as a tribute for Relinquished, which is cool. A lot of the times, too, Moth plus any monster is game as long as it's 500 more attack. Sphere Karibo is 300, unfortunately, so this isn't game. But if you have it to where you need to normal summon this, and you've already summoned this is 4,000. And a lot of people aren't playing... Well, it depends on the deck, of course, but a lot of people aren't playing Sphere Karibo specifically. So if you've wiped out their back row, you know you could just go off. Another thing with Moth, though, early game, is if you open this in like a Relinquished play, you can tribute this to the graveyard, summon the Relinquished, and then shuffle this back into the deck to get a free draw. And then it kind of covers the basis of what Switcheroo does, kind of. Whereas before I was playing Switcheroo, where twice per duel you could get a different card, hopefully, if you didn't shuffle the card and draw the same one. It kind of goes in tandem here, where you can, shuffle this back if it's dead, if you've used it as a tribute, to get a draw. But you can also, if this whiffs, like if your opponent stops this and you didn't have an insect to drop for it for free, shuffle this back and draw a card. Like, the cool part is that if they have an out to this early, you still get a draw out of it, assuming they hit the graveyard. If they Cosmic it, well, I guess you don't get anything. But it's just an extra engine that the deck can utilize and still play perfectly fine. Like I said, Relinquished doesn't have a dedicated skill. Like, at XYZ, you most likely always play Union Combination. In a Monarch-type deck, you most likely are always playing Interconflict. In a Burn-esque deck, you're always playing Twisted Personality. But Relinquished, you don't need to play the Ritual Ceremony or the Thousand Eyes spell. You can kind of do whatever you want with it, which is cool. I think it gives it more versatility. So we played the Moth package with that, and that's how we went about the deck. The last card in the deck, of course, is Triple Breaker the Magic Warrior. Like I said, Relinquished does not utilize the normal summon at all, which is great because then you can play things that do utilize the normal summon. I feel like this is currently the only best option that Speed Duels has. That's the best normal summon in the game, basically, because it gives you a Spell Trap Destruction effect and a body that's 1600 that over time, that 1600 can wither your opponent down, but also it could be 19 if you keep the spell counter on it, which is just solid in itself. So the main deck itself is actually 24 cards. That's kind of high. I usually like to set around 22, 23 max. And like I said, going forward, I might go back to just playing 3 and 1 and cut the other Moth, so it ends up being 23. Another option is you could cut the Wonder Wand. Wonder Wand's like a win more card in the fact that you get the draw, but like you can put it on Breaker and make them 21 or 24 if you haven't used the spell counter yet, which is actually pretty good by itself. You can, in desperate situations, put it on Relinquished. Keep in mind you won't get Faceless' effect to summon it back, because it doesn't destroy it, it sends it to the graveyard. But obviously the best combo is obviously Wonder Wanding the Faceless. But the other thing with Relinquished that I have a big problem with is that you don't really want to side out anything in the deck. And I know people will say, well, you could cut a Faceless. The problem with Faceless is that it's so good, you want to see it as soon as possible, and you don't mind, like I said, drawing multiples, because as soon as one hits the board, next turn you contribute it for the other one. In the past, I was playing 2 and a Foolish, and you could play the Djinn with the Foolish, but the thing with that is, like, you'd rather have 3 of these than 2 and a Foolish. Because, like, late game or something, if this is on board and I draw into the Foolish, I mean, I can't Foolish this, you know, it just doesn't work like that. So it actually ends up being more relevant as a tribute summon. But by that logic, you can actually play other tribute summon monsters to also make this card relevant as well. But like I said, so you don't really want to cut out too much of the main package. You always want 2 to 3 of this, usually 3 of that. You want the pre-preps, you want the Relinquishes, and you want the Black Illusions. So you're playing 15 cards you don't want to cut. And in a 20-card version of this, usually it's like, these are the other 3. I play this in the main, so you're at 19. And then if you're not playing the Moth package, you're playing some 20th card. That the 20th card plus the Wonder Wand plus maybe a Breaker is what you side out. But depending on the matchup, you want to save these. And you don't really want to cut these. And I understand, again, you could cut 1 or you could cut 1 and probably be okay. But I want the consistency. I want to keep that there. So it depends on the matchup, like I said. But having these in the deck lets you play around with siding numbers, because you can side 1 and 1, like I said, and play this package, and I think this is perfectly acceptable as well, because this isn't the center point of your deck, but it's definitely a strong part of the deck, and as long as you still have the presence of it, you're fine, but you don't need to max out on these, depending on what the matchup that you're playing against is. So a lot of the times I would side out 1, the Wonder Wand, and that would usually bring in only like 3 cards max, depending on the matchup. Sometimes you could side out a Breaker as well. Against XYZ, I like to side out a Breaker, because Breaker doesn't really do anything. Everything that you're going to pop with this card, outside of them siding Lost Wind, is chainable. So you can, and then in XYZ, you can side these out and keep more of your core main deck engine. This is really good against XYZ anyway. You could just OHKO them out of nowhere, which is really nice. And then you can actually arguably keep the Wonder Wand in as well. Usually I like to do this because Wonder Wand is situational. It's a good card game 1, but after that you don't really need it. Because at that point you're siding in the cards that are better geared toward the matchup you're playing. But let's get into the side deck for it. As far as the extra deck goes, in general, we play 1000 Eyes Restrict, 1 Ryush Senshi, 1 Alligator Sword Dragon, 1 Meteor Black Dragon, 1 Arcana Knight Joker, and 1 Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. The reason we play these is because we do side 1 copy of Waking the Dragon. I feel like this is only good against the decks that literally are popping your back row consistently. And I feel like that's only against inter-conflict decks, where they're playing the Grand Marks, the Breakers, and Night Beams. Like, this is only good for that. In which case, most of the time, these are the only 2 things you're summoning. These usually get left on the back burner, but you would like to have them as options sometimes. But this is a good tempo card. If you're not really in the know, this is like your Mystic Mind of the deck, where you can sit on this until you draw what you need, and then you go off from there. And this is your hard-hitting hammer deck, where if your opponent targets this with a card, once per turn, you can discard the same type of card, Monster, Spell, or Trap, to negate that effect. It doesn't destroy it, so it depends what they use. But if they have Book of Moon, for example, and you have a spell in hand, you can pitch the spell to negate the Book of Moon. If they have a monster effect that they want to use to try to get rid of this, and you have a monster in hand, you can discard a monster. And there's definitely no shortcomings of monsters you can discard and not worry about. Spell's a little bit different, but it depends, obviously, again. Blue Eyes Ultimate, I mean, you play it just because it's 45. It can by itself swing in for game. Meteor Black Dragon is the weaker version of that. This is probably the worst thing in the extra deck. In the past, I just play 2 Restricts, but again, if you're only playing 1 Waking the Dragon, there's no point in playing 2 of the same card. You might as well just diversify it. Senshi is decent in the fact that when a normal trap is activated, you can pay 1,000 life points to negate that effect. Depending on what you're playing against, like I said, it might come up, and also it negates the effects of any spell that targets it. An Alligator Sword Dragon, as much as it's very situational, it can attack directly if the only face-up monsters your opponent controls are Earth, Water, or Fire. So, depending on what you're playing against and what the matchup is, this can just swing for game. But like I said, you're only usually summoning either one of these off of it, and it's only usually against a Monarch deck, or a deck that is just heavily on popping your back row. So in addition to Waking the Dragon, we play one-off Feast of the Doomed. This card, in my opinion, is very situational, but it has a lot of extra aspects in the fact that you can pop your own card and summon the Faceless off of it, or pop the Faceless and get a Relinquished off of it. It does come up in situations where if they're taking this to tribute it with something, you can pop it instead and get this, and then they've lost their tribute, they've lost their inter-conflict target, they've lost their Relinquish effect if you're doing a mirror match. Granted, in a mirror match, you might just let it go and have them keep their Relinquished. You know, it depends on the situation, of course. But the card does come up in situations. I feel Book of Moon is actually the weakest thing in this deck. It's crazy to say that. Book of Moon really doesn't give you anything extra. Setting their monster means that if you take it with Relinquished, it's traded 0/0. And while it does depend on, obviously, the matchup, right now I feel like Book of Moon just doesn't do enough for you. So we don't play Book of Moon. We do play the 2 Lost Wind, obviously, because this is still really, really good against XYZ. And the Mirror, believe it or not, we actually had 3 Relinquished players in our 8-man tournament. So this actually did come up a lot, especially in the Mirror match, round 1. But I just feel like this is like the best generic side deck card you can play right now. We play the one Jack of all trades, Widespread Ruin. Spellproof Armor has been talked about a lot at our locals, and I actually lost to it last week. And that was the only loss I had with this. So it knocked me out of getting first place. I lost round 1 to Spellproof Armor. I just really couldn't deal with it. So I wanted something to deal with the deck. This deck has a really good matchup against Spellproof, because you just take their monsters, you don't have to use any spells on them. But I wanted something extra just in case we ran into that situation again. And the last card I play is Twister. And I think Twister gets a bad rap right now. A lot of people just play Cosmic Cyclone for the 1,000, and it banishes, and then everyone else is playing Night Beam if they're playing Spell and Trap Hate. And I feel like Twister is actually really good, because the only things you're worried about in this deck are face-up continuous Spell and Trap cards. If you can't deal with a Zoma, like if you've absorbed all the stuff on the field except the Zoma, and they flip the Zoma, Zoba ends up being a problem depending on where they flip it. If you're playing against Magnet Warriors, this deck actually has a really tough Magnet Warrior matchup. This gets rid of the field spell, just straight up. And 500 life is not that bad. Also, why I like this card in this deck is that it's the similar reason of Breaker in this deck. If you have, let's say, a monster equipped with a Relinquish on the field, you could summon Breaker, for example, and assuming you haven't used this effect this turn, you can Breaker pop this to then equip something else. It's a similar concept with Twister. You can, if you're in that situation where you've equipped a monster to this and you haven't used this card's effect this turn, but you want to absorb something else, you can activate Twister, pop your own card that's equipped with the Relinquish, and then equip something else. And like, you could do that with Cosmic, but I don't know if you really want to do that with Cosmic. Like, paying 1,000 just to absorb something else. I mean, it depends what you banish, I guess. But this is just more versatile, I feel like. And again, you're not paying as much life points. But yeah, the other thing about these is just they're really nice in the fact that you can pop your own cards to give yourself more advantage, which is really nice. But guys, that is my Relinquished deck in a nutshell. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. This deck is, in my opinion, like, I've been playing it since the beginning. That's what I played at Nats in 2019 when they were doing Speed Duel flights. And back then it was because a lot of people told me the deck was bad and that it didn't amount to much, so I wanted to prove everyone wrong because I love being petty when it comes to this game. But aside from that, I just like the versatility this deck has. I don't know why more people don't play this card. Or play this deck, I should say. Like, sure, its main power is based off of what your opponent is playing. That's fair. But right now, we live in a format where this doesn't have a terrible matchup. Like, it depends what you play against. A lot of people at our locals, for example, are playing XYZ right now. And I feel like this has a really good XYZ matchup. But if a lot of people tend to then switch to, like, Magnet Warriors, I might not play this because I think the field spell is a huge problem. Obviously, we'd probably play more Twisters if that came down to that. But like I said, its matchups are not terrible, no matter what you play against. What's nice about the Moth package against like something like Magnets is that you can try to capitalize off the damage before they have the chance to set up. The thing with Magnet Warriors is like, if they get the ball rolling, they get really, really tough to beat. But early game, if you can like Oko them really fast, like they can't come back from that, usually. But Relinquished doesn't really have the ability to OHKO unless you're playing the MOTH package. Of the 8 duelists that played in our event yesterday, it was 4 XYZ players, 3 Relinquished players, which is why it was so ridiculous, and 1 Monarch player. But like I said, we have a lot of players on the roster that have been interested. It's just not all of them have shown up on the same day for whatever reason. So hopefully, I say this every week, hopefully next week we will have more players. I would love to bring you guys in-depth analysis on a tournament that's at like 14 players rather than 8 or less. I don't know, 4 rounds to me or more is just, you get a broader spectrum of how the game is played. But let me know, guys. Comment, like, and subscribe as always. I'm Yugi Bros, and I'm out. Peace.